Hey, what's going on? This is Kex Next, and I wanted to say something before I started this video, and that is I was pretty sick while recording this tutorial, so, the whole thing was pretty much a fever dream. Excuse my sick voice, I'm sorry, I may have forgotten a little detail at the end. I'll come back and voice over that too. I apologize for the sloppiness. I was trying to get something out as quick as I could, and I was sick, so, I don't know, bear with me on this one. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial other than that though, thanks. Hey, what's going on? This is Kex Next, and today we're going to be taking a look at creating the Disney logo. This intro is classic, it's on all of their old movies. It actually looks pretty easy to recreate. It was a little hard to figure out how, all the pieces and parts work together, but once I did, it was pretty easy to replicate. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be creating. Alright, so it looks pretty cool. Now, this effect is completely inside of After Effects. The only part that you're going to be downloading are the two fonts, which are Waltograph and Lublingraph. Lublingraph was a little hard to get a hold of, but both are in the description. There's a link in the description for those two fonts, so make sure you download them and install them. The other two things you're going to need are, firstly this reference picture, and we're just going to use this for its colors, just to get the colors pretty exact. And then also this this PNG image. If I turn on alpha, you can see it. It just has the castle, and we're just going to use this so we can auto trace the castle. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a new composition. So we're going to create this new little composition button down here, make sure it's 1920 by 1080, and hit OK. And we're going to drag in our PNG image, which there's a link in the description, so make sure that you go get that. And we're just going to drag it into our comp, and we can turn on alpha so we can kind of see what we're doing. And we want to just draw a mask around the castle. So take your pen tool, and let's draw a mask, because we don't need anything else. We just need the castle. And it doesn't have to be exact, but make sure that you mask out everything else in the image. So once we have that, we can go ahead and right click on our image and go down to pre-compose, and we'll call this castle. And make sure move all attributes is selected and hit OK. And so now that we have this, we can go ahead and turn alpha off. And then we can go to layer and down to auto trace. And actually, let me zoom in a little bit so we can see what we're doing. And then go back to layer and then auto trace. And if you turn on preview, you can see the masks that it's going to create. And if you have the tolerance turned up to a high number, it's going to have a lot more curves in it, and it's not going to be exact. But if it's on the lowest number, it's going to include all the pixels in our image, and it won't be a vector. So we just want to find a very small number, so around 0.7 should be pretty good. And we want to make sure that the channel is set to alpha, and that it says apply to new layer. And we can hit OK. And once we have it, we can go ahead and delete our castle pre-comp. So next thing that we want to do is drag in our reference image. So we can just take our reference image and drag it in here, and we get this nice little picture. And we can drag it off screen when we don't need it, but when we do need it, we can just put it right here. But next thing we want to do is create a background. So we can right click, go down to new and new solid, and take the little color dropper tool and make sure that this background color is selected and hit OK. And then you can just move it under everything else. And you can also go to the auto traced castle and go to layer and solid settings. And then take the little eyedropper and make sure that the castle color is selected. And now we have ourselves a nice little Disney castle. And it looks pretty cool. And you can actually see all the masks on it if you go to it and hit M. For me, it made 29 masks, which is, a lot, but we'll mess around with those later. For right now, we want to animate our castle on screen. And if, you have a reference, and I do, I have this little video of all the Disney logos, you can kind of see how the castle animates on screen with this light at the bottom. And it's just a wipe. So what we can do is go to our castle, our auto trace castle, go to the effect controls, right click, then go down to linear wipe. And you can go ahead and turn the wipe angle to 0 degrees. And if you turn up the completion, you can see what it's doing. Actually, you can go to this button down here, and this will turn off our masks for now, so we can see what we're doing. But you can kind of see how we are animating the castle on. And if you turn up the feather, you have this little effect right here. And that's pretty cool and all, but we don't have the light. And we'll get to that in just a second. But first, let's animate our castle coming on. So the animation lasts around 5 seconds in the Disney reference video. So what we can do is go to linear wipe, click the stopwatch for transition completion and make sure it's on 100, and then go forward to 5 seconds in and turn the completion to 0. And now we have this little castle animating on. But now that we have that, we can go ahead and duplicate the layer with Command D or Control D on Windows, and we just want to turn off the bottom layer. And with the top one, we can go up to linear wipe and duplicate it with Command D or Control D on Windows. And we want to turn the wipe angle to 180. And if we turn up the completion, you can see we just have a bar of the castle. And this is what we're going to apply our light to. So if we scrub through it, you can kind of see it's not what we want. And what we can do to fix that is hit U on the keyboard to bring up all of our keyframes. And for some reason, all the masks are keyframes. It's okay, just scrub past that. And you want to delete the keyframe we just made, and then you can swap the two keyframes that are there for the second linear wipe. So you want to line them up pretty well. And once you have that, you can kind of see you just have this faint bar that kind of scrolls across the screen, and it's not really, it's not very visible. So what we can do is turn down the feather amount for both layers. And then you can select both of the keyframes for the second linear completion effect and just kind of scooch them over. And then it will make this bar for you that just kind of scrolls throughout the image, and it's very clear. If you want, you can turn the feather up a little more, but you really don't need it that high. You can turn on your bottom castle layer, and you can select all 4 of the keyframes for the top layer and just move them around until you get a transition that's right below the one on top of it. So then you can scroll up and close that top layer and go back down to that bottom layer and hit U on the keyboard to bring up the keyframes and select both of them. You can just select one and then hold down Shift and click the other one. And if you move it over, you can kind of separate those two transitions. Maybe you can turn the feathering amount down a little bit, and then move it back a little bit, just like that. Alright, so once we have that, we have this little castle transition. That's pretty cool, but we want to add the glow. So if we select the top layer, and we can close these two linear wipe effects, so now you can go to the effect controls and right click and go down to stylize and then glow, and that'll add a glow to the image. But you want to make sure that glow based on is set to alpha channel. And then you can go down to A and B colors and turn color A to the color of the castle, and same with color B. But if you make color A a little bit brighter, and same with color B, you can kind of see what it's doing. It's just using our alpha. And you can turn the threshold down just a little bit, and then also the radius up. And maybe turn the intensity to about 2.2. Alright, so we have these very bright looking glows. Maybe we can turn the radius up a little bit higher. Maybe turn the glow threshold up a little bit. But once we have that, we can duplicate the glow. So go ahead and do that with Command D or Control D on Windows. And maybe turn the glow intensity to 1, and then turn the threshold down and the radius way up. Maybe not that high up, but pretty far. Kind of see what that's doing. That looks pretty good. Maybe turn the glow intensity down, so like 0.2 should work. Alright, so that looks pretty good. And then you can actually duplicate it one more time. So Command D. And this one, we're just going to increase the radius a little bit, and then also turn the intensity up. And turn the threshold down. So you want to turn the threshold up to about 100, and then you can turn the radius up, and then also the intensity. Turn that, really just play around with this. Maybe up a little bit, and then set the glow operation to screen. There we go, we can see what that's doing. It's making it a lot brighter. And, it's pretty good, but it doesn't look like it's fading into the rest of the castle. And to do that, you can just mess around with the feathering options in our linear wipes. So especially that second one, it should do a little bit for you. So right about there, and then also the first one. Mess around with that feather. Really just play around until you get something that you really enjoy. I think this looks pretty good. And maybe hit U on the keyboard to bring up the keyframes again, and go down, and maybe scooch over the those bottom keyframes. So maybe delete that middle one, and then select that last one, and then hold down Shift and select the first one and move it over a little bit. And that'll control sort of how much glow you have. And I think that looks pretty good by itself, but once we have that, we just close up the layers, and now we have our castle that is animating on. And if we want to preview it, we can preview it. It might take a little while, so we can set the resolution to half, but it does look pretty good. The only problem with it is if I zoom in here and go to that first little spot, you can see all this banding around the glow. And if you don't want all that banding, you can go over to where it says 8 bits per channel and change this to 32 bits per channel. Now, this will completely fix your color issues. It will get rid of almost all the banding. You'll still have a little bit though, but it will take a lot longer to render. So we'll change that later, but right now, let's set it to 8 bits per channel, which is also what is accepted on the internet. So if you're planning on uploading this to the web, you might want to work in 8 bits per channel. So that looks really, really awesome. And now we want to do the text. So to do that, we can close up all this stuff, and we can right click, go to New Text Layer. And we're just going to type Walt Disney, or in my case, because I don't want to get sued, I'm going to do Dibney. I don't know. I thought it was pretty clever. Now that I think about it, though, I don't know. But you want to set the font to Waltograph. And so you have these Disney letters now, which is really great. And if you select it and then hit V so you can move it over, we want to reposition it. So you can stretch out these letters, maybe turn this to 0, so it's like a normal font. And then also set the letter stretching to 185. And this will bring it back to the normal font. I think it should do that automatically. I was just playing around with fonts earlier. But once you have this, you kind of want to position it so that the D is right in the doorway of the castle. And since we have a reference image, we can go ahead and bring that out, and we can kind of see what it's supposed to look like. So we have, the D kind of going through the doorway of the castle, and then this part touching the corner. And then we want the Y to be, the E and the Y and a little bit of the N to be out here, and then the W to be out here. So that looks pretty good. We can just move our reference image out of frame for now. And we have it set pretty well, but we don't have it animating on. And if you look at your reference video, and you can pull it up if you'd like, you can go ahead and look at what happens to the text. I'm going to mute it right now, but it kind of like goes into this huge glow ball and just animates on. And we can do the same thing with a mask and a lot of glow. And one thing that I do want to do that I just saw from the reference video is our glow doesn't look very colorful. So if you want to go back into the glow and mess around with the colors a little more, I highly recommend that you do that. But really, make it pretty blue, because that is what Disney wants. Right. We can go back and do this later and go and screw around with it. And you can have different versions of our effect, but that does look pretty good, I do have to admit. But now we can turn back on our Walt Disney, and we want to animate this thing on. So to do that, we're actually not even going to use the text at all. So you can turn it off for now. Okay, so now we kind of want to worry about the timing of this animation. And if we go back to our reference and see how the text animates on, you can kind of see how there's a second, like a pause between the castle animation and the text animation. And then, the glow ball takes about a second to grow to its full size, and then another second to kind of dissipate once the text is revealed. So what we can do is right-click in our layers panel and create a new solid. And you want to make it white, hit OK, and hit OK. And in here, we want to draw a mask. So if we turn this layer off and turn our text on so we can kind of see what we're doing, you want to draw a mask starting like right below the castle and right in the center of the D or whatever your text is. So if you go to the mask tool and hold down, you can see these different shapes, and make sure that you have the elliptical mask tool selected. You want to make sure that you have your white solid selected, and you want to go right below the castle and about right in the center of the D. And if you click and drag, and hold down Command on a Mac, your mask will start wherever your cursor started. And it's either Control or Shift on Windows. I forgot which one it is. You'll have to play around with that, but I don't usually use Windows that often. But you want to make a mask that completely engulfs the text. So about right there. And then if you hit F on the keyboard to bring up the mask feather and click it, and then hit V to bring up your selection tool, you can just kind of move these vertices inwards because you don't want them too high. So once you have that, you can turn off your text layer and turn on your white solid. And we want to set the mode to additive. And you can take the mask and twirl down the mask options. And you want to go to the frame where the castle animation stops, which is about here. And we'll go forward about 15 frames because in our reference video, it takes about 15 frames for the animation to start. So we're going to set a keyframe for mask path right here. Go for another second, which in my case is 30 frames because I'm working in 30 frames per second. Set another keyframe, go forward another second, and set one more keyframe. And you want this mask to be this exact shape on the second keyframe, but on the first one, you can double click on one of the vertices, drag one of the corners and hold down Command, and just make the mask really, really small. And again, either Control or Shift on Windows. You're going to have to figure that out. And on the last keyframe, you can make the mask a little bit bigger. Remember to hold down Command or Control or Shift. About right there. Maybe a little bit bigger. And so, if we turn our layer on, we can see what's happening. And our mask is just animating. But now we want to add some glow. So if we go to our top castle layer, click on the first glow, hold down Shift, and then click on the last glow, we can copy them with Command C or Control C in Windows. And that'll just, copy these effects. And if we go to our white solid and go to the effect controls and paste them with Command V or Control V on Windows, we'll have a nice little glow ball. And you want to turn the mask feather up just a little bit so you can blend the solid in with that glow. And then you can maybe turn the glow radius up. Or down depending on which glow you're going to mess with. So maybe the last glow. Alright, that looks pretty good, but it looks a little too bright. So we can maybe turn the mask opacity down just a little bit. So to about, let's say, 60%. And now we can go to the effect controls, right click, go to color correction, and then curves. And we can go to the channel and set it to alpha. And then if you mess around with alpha, you can kind of see you can take the brightness of the mask down a little bit, or make it, give it more brightness. Mess around in here until you get something that you like. And again, you have a lot of banding out here on the edges. And again, you can set the color mode to 32 bits per channel, and that will get rid of a lot of it, but it'll take a lot more time to render. So, make sure that you do that towards the end of this tutorial. So I'm thinking that this mask is maybe a little too big, so we can, make it a little bit smaller, but we still want it to cover our text. So if we turn on our Walt Disney layer, our text, we can go back up to the mask and double click on one of the vertices, drag one of the corners, and hold down Command. And you just want to make it smaller on the second keyframe. It's about right there. It's pretty good. And so now we have this mask ball. Maybe turn up the opacity a little more, so like 75% should be good. Alright, and now if we take our Walt Disney layer and go to the beginning and, cut the layer up to that second keyframe. So, you have your mask animating, and at that second keyframe, it just gets bigger and bigger and doesn't stop. So what you can do is set a keyframe for the mask feather at that second one. Go over to the third one and, turn the feathering amount up a little bit. And then you can go over to the mask opacity and do the same thing, except at the third keyframe you want to decrease the opacity. Right there. And actually, one more time, you want to go to the mask expansion, go to that last keyframe, and expand the mask. You want that glow to kind of look like it's growing out and fading instead of, fading inwards. So maybe turn the expansion up to about 100 pixels. And you can kind of see what that looks like. And again, there's a ton of banding. Remember, 32 bits per channel. Gonna keep on saying that. Looks really, really great with 32 bits a channel. Just saying, But But we'll do that later. But, we can preview this, and it looks pretty good. Looks pretty true, except for that banding. Really annoying me. But it looks pretty good. Maybe it could be a little bit faster. So maybe you can select all these keyframes, move them inwards, select all the other keyframes and move them inwards as well. And we'll see what that looks like. So we want to select all of the mask path keyframes, right-click, go to Keyframe Assistant, and select Easy Ease. And then if we hit this little graph button right here to bring up the graph editor, we just want to make sure that these keyframes will transition into each other instead of, having two huge arches that stop at this one point. So if we click that point and drag up, we can just move these keyframes around. And we just want them to match up. So maybe have this huge arc instead of two different arches. So like that. But you just really, really want them to blend together into one path. And that'll help our animation. Alright. So it looks pretty good. Maybe drag those other keyframes out a couple more frames so that's a little bit slower. Alright, so it looks pretty good. Then you can, zoom back out with this little slider down here. Alright, so now we want to animate the little ball that kind of goes across the castle. So to do this, we're going to use a shape layer and a manually created flare. So first thing we're going to do is create the shape layer. So select New and then Shape Layer. And we want to draw a shape. So make sure that you have your elliptical mask tool selected. And we want to start at the bottom of the entrance to the castle, so about right here. So you want to click and drag and hold down Command so you have this, the circle starts where your cursor started. And if you hold down Shift on Mac, you get a perfect circle. And the top of the circle is about where the castle's little bumps are. So about right there. And you can let go. And if you go into the ellipse settings down here and go to Fill 1, turn the opacity to 0. And then go to the stroke and turn the stroke width up to about 7. And if we take our little reference image and move it into frame, we can kind of see how big the stroke is compared to everything else. And we can also color it. So if you go to the color of the stroke, press the little eyedropper tool and pick the color of this stroke, we can get it the same-ish color. But maybe we can make the stroke a little bit bigger, so about 8 pixels. Alright. And now we can just move our reference image back out of frame. So, one thing that you'll notice is it's going all the way around, and we don't want that. So what we can do is go to our shape layer, go twirl down the settings, and where it says add, click that, and go to trim paths. And just wait a second for it to come up. And when it does, you can twirl down the settings and, trim it, like it says. And that's really, really helpful. So we can set the end to about 45 degrees, and the start, we can set that to 2, and then you can offset the pass about right here so that this end over here is really close to the W, and then you can just kind of increase the end percentage so it's really close to the E. And so now you have the arc of the logo. So there's a couple things to keep in mind though, and that is, that our path is crossing with this. And what we can do is go ahead and put it under our castle layer, about right there. Alright, so it looks pretty good. Now we want to animate it arcing across the screen. So we can go to the trim paths and we can animate the start position. So if you go ahead to right after the text appears, so go about 4 frames after the text appears, and you just want to set a keyframe for the start position. And you want to set the start position to 50%. And then you can go forward to about where the next second starts and set another keyframe and set it to about 2%. Alright, so now we have this arc across the screen. That looks pretty good. But now we want to create the little flare that's at the end of it. And if we look at our reference, we can kind of see what that looks like. So it's like this little ball of light that comes up and, has reflections on the castle. And we'll look at that in just a second. And also the pictures. But we want to focus on our arc right now. So we can create a new little ball of light in a new composition. So click on the new composition button and hit OK. And make sure to save your project. So remember to do that. So Command S or Control S on Windows. But now we want to create our little flare. So you can right click in the layer panel, go to New, Solid, and hit OK. And then in the effect controls, you can go to right click, go down to generate, and select circle. And now we have this little circle, and we want to increase the radius, and then if you go to the feather settings, increase that as well. Maybe decrease the radius. And you want to turn the opacity to about 75%. And then you can duplicate it with Command D or Control D on Windows. And you can decrease the size. And maybe also decrease the feathering amount. And turn the opacity to about 85%. Alright. And then we can duplicate our layer one more time. So Command D or Control D on Windows. And decrease the radius even further. And also the feathering, decrease that. And then turn the opacity to 100%. And so now we have this little flare type thing. We also want to add one more effect, and it's called solid composite. So now that you have all these, you can select them all, right click, hit pre-compose, and make sure move all attributes into the new composition is selected, and hit OK. In the effect controls panel, you can right click, go down to channel, and select solid composite. And make sure it's set to black, and hit OK, and that just makes it so that there's no alpha in our comp. So once you have that, you can go back to your comp 1 and drag in comp 2 right above the shape layer. Actually, make it above everything else. You want it above everything. And you want to set the blending mode to additive. And you can hit S on the keyboard to bring up the scale settings and scale it down a lot to about 40%. And you can move it over to the end, to the start of the line. And that looks pretty good. Maybe set the blending mode to screen. And then right click in the effect controls, go to color correction, and then curves. And we can maybe brighten it up a little bit. Decrease the feathering amount. And then set the scale to lower. So maybe like 20%. And so we want to animate this little spark across the screen. So what we can do is animate the position. So if you go to the shape layer and hit U on the keyboard to bring up the keyframes, we can go to the frame where it starts and set a keyframe for position in our comp 2. So if we hit P, we can bring up the position. And click the stopwatch to set a keyframe right here. Go to the frame where it's reached about the top of the arc. Set another keyframe for comp 2. And go to the last frame and set another keyframe. Hit V on the keyboard to bring up your selection tool. And on the first keyframe, go to the frame that it starts and drag our little ball. So about right here. And that may have created another keyframe, just drag that back. And if we go to the second keyframe, about right here, drag the ball to the top of the arc. And then you can go to the last keyframe and drag it down here. But as you can tell, it's kind of created this triangle, which does not follow the arc. And what you can do is, if you click on the position, you can kind of see these little handles that are poking out. That'll allow you to curve the position. So you just want to do that for all keyframes and get it really circular. Make sure that it follows the path pretty closely. So about right there, and you just want to play around with it until you get something you really like. And do the same for this last keyframe. If you hit G on the keyboard, you can bring up your pen tool, and if you roll over one of the vertices and click and drag, you can convert that vertice to a two-handle vertex. I don't know what it's called, but that's what I'm going to call it for this tutorial. But make sure that it matches your semicircle pretty well. And again, you can hit G to bring up the mask conversion tool and just kind of drag one at a time. And you should get something that looks pretty good pretty fast. Alright. So now we have our spark following our little arc. We want to create the reflections on the castle. So to do that, we can go to our auto traced layer and duplicate it with Command D. And you want to drag it above our other castle layers. And you want to hit enter. So let's rename it Reflect. Alright, so what we can do with this is click it and just delete the linear wipe effect. And then you can scroll down, go to masks, and you just want to create a new mask. So go to your elliptical mask tool and create a little mask where our ball is closest to. So about right here. And what you can do is click mask 29 or the last mask that besides the one that you didn't create, hold down Shift and click the first mask and set them all to add. And if you set the last one to intersect, it's actually intersecting, you can't see it. If we turn off our other castle layers, you can see what it's doing. But it's just creating this little, splotch of light where our circle is. And we can scroll back up and close this. And we just want to animate this mask to follow our circle. So right now it's pretty close. Maybe we can turn up the feather amount of our mask. It's about right here. Make it a little bit more like a light. And we want to animate the position of it. So go to the frame where our arc starts, so about right here, and set a keyframe for mask path. And if you double click on the vertices of the mask, you can move it around. And you just want to put it right here, maybe make it a little bit bigger. And you can go to where our spark reaches the top, double click on one of the vertices, and move it up to where our spark is. About right here. And then go forward to the last frame and do the same thing. So it's not going to look perfect, so what you want to do is hand animate it at the parts where it doesn't look too good. So you can double click on the mask, move it over, make it a little bit bigger, and just keep going until you get something that looks really good. So I'm going to fast forward the video right here, and I'll show you once I'm done. Alright, so I've finished, and one thing that I noticed that I actually kind of forgot to do is, when the spark goes behind the tower part, so right here, you want it to kind of, obscure it. And with real lens flare, when an object obscures the flare, it gets a little bit bigger right before it passes through. So what you can do is bring up the scale settings of our little flare here, and go to the point right before it enters. And go one frame before that, and hit a keyframe for scale. Go one frame forward, and scale up our flare just a tad. One frame forward, and set it to about 20%. And one more frame, and set this back to 25%. And one more, and set it to 20%. And that'll just make it so that when it goes behind our castle, it gets bigger. And we're going to look at, putting the rest of the castle in front of it in just a second. But, we want to take our reflect layer, right click, and hit pre-compose. And select move all attributes, and hit OK. And if we go into that comp, and click on the reflect layer, we can go to layer, solid settings, and make sure that it is white, and hit OK. And this will just kind of create a layer for us where we can put our glow on. So one more thing that we do want to do is create a spot where this little part of the castle right here is being blacked out because the flare is behind it. So we want to go to this frame right here and go into our reflect settings, hit M on the keyboard, and click on this mask, see what mask it is, and this is mask 3. And you want to hit Command C on the keyboard to copy it, or Control C on Windows. And then you can right click, create a new solid, and hit Command V or Control V on Windows, and that'll just create a mask for us right there. And what we can do is go click on that top white solid, click Layer, Solid Settings, and make it black. Hit OK. And we want to go to the point where the flare is behind it, so right here. And we want to drag our layer forward to our playhead, and do the same for the end layer, all the way. You just have this one frame of darkness. And maybe if you want to, set the resolution to full and increase the mask expansion a little bit, so about 1 pixel. Alright, so that looks pretty good. And that's just going to obscure our flare in the actual comp. And so if we go back into comp 1, we can set the transfer mode to additive. And that will get rid of our black layer. And actually maybe go into that one more time and increase the mask expansion one more time to like 2 pixels. We just really want to hide that little edge that keeps showing up. So now we can actually turn on our other castles, and you can kind of see what this looks like. So pretty cool. You have a little shimmering light. But one thing, our flare is not obscured by this castle part. So what we can do is take our bottom castle, and we can duplicate this layer. So duplicate it with Command D or Control D on Windows. Hit Enter, and we'll call it obscure. And we just want to put it above everything else. And if we hit M on the keyboard to bring up the masks, go to every mask and delete them except for the third mask. So hold down shift, select them, and just delete everything except for that third mask. And again, we can just make this 1 frame long. So right there, and if we zoom out, we can grab the back of the layer and just drag it in. So now we have this little part that's obscuring our flare. And that's pretty perfect. You know, I don't really like that, how the circle's stretched out right there, so maybe I can go into our other comp and just kind of redo that. Alright, so that looks pretty good. One thing that we might want to do is go to the reflect comp and turn down the opacity just a little bit. And that'll give us more of like a light feel. And we do want to add some glow to this. So we can go to the reflect comp, right click in the effect controls, and apply a stylize glow. And we can turn down the glow threshold just a little bit, and then turn up the radius. And maybe also the intensity to like 1.5. And that glow looks pretty good. Again, maybe turn the opacity down a little bit more, so like 25%. Maybe not that low. 45. Alright, so pretty good. Maybe we can go back into that comp and make that circle a little bit smaller. So turn the mask expansion down. Go back into it. Yeah, that looks better. Alright, so pretty cool. And one more thing, you know, we want it to end at this frame, and we can drag our reflect comp and stop it right at that frame. About like that. Alright, so the other thing that we want to do is drag our comp 2, and we just want it to start at this frame because it's there throughout the shot, and we just want it to begin at this frame. So if we drag this, stop it right there, we have a pretty good looking shot. Maybe actually set the comp to additive. I don't like how white it was. And then also maybe make it a little bit less bright. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Maybe actually scale it down a little bit more. Let's do like 15%. Maybe more than that. Let's do 18. Alright. So that looks really, really good. One thing that we are missing is the pictures text that comes down below that. So we can right click and create a new text layer, and we'll just call this pictures. And we can highlight it and make the text Lublin graph, which is a font that I asked you to download at the beginning of this tutorial. And we actually want to make it Lublin graph extra light, which is the font that I've provided. So maybe turn on the bold setting, and you can click out of it and go to your selection tool with V and just move it under there. And you can scale it down, maybe use the size, and you actually want to spread out the text. So use this little tool right here to, you know, space out the lettering. So about 100, let's do 50%. And then maybe, you know, shorten it like that. That looks pretty good. Maybe make it a lot smaller. And you just want to put it right under Walt Disney. And also, you can move our reference image into frame and select pictures and highlight it. And then you just want to match the color to the actual picture's logo. So just like that. Alright, so it looks pretty good. And then we can actually delete our reference image now because we won't need it anymore. But that looks pretty good. We actually want to fade in the picture's logo so it happens right before our flare starts. So we can go 1, 2, 3, and hit T on the keyboard to bring up opacity, and click on the stopwatch and turn it, go forward about 3 frames and turn it to 100%. So it just kind of fades in. Maybe if you want to slow it down, you could drag out the keyframes a little bit more. Alright, but that looks like a pretty good Walt Disney logo. One thing that we want to do is turn the bits per channel to 32 bits per channel, and that will get rid of all of the color banding, of course. Been saying that for a billion million years. And it'll also kind of brighten up our reflection glow. And we don't want that. So if we go back into 32 bits per channel, we can go to our reflection layer, hit T on the keyboard, and we can turn down the opacity even more. So about 15%. And maybe actually turn the glow intensity down to about 0.5. And then you can turn the opacity back up. Alright. So that looks pretty good. But now we want to just select all these layers, right click, hit pre-compose, and we'll call this final, and hit OK. And now we just want to hit S on the keyboard and scale it up just a little bit because the actual logo is a little bit bigger on the screen. So we can scale it up to 120%, hit P on the keyboard, and just drag it down a little bit. And then also set the resolution to full. Make sure that you go to the reflection comp and trim it so that it starts at this point. You also want to trim the white solid to about this point so it only shows up at that point in our comp. Alright. Hey, it's me, Unsick Kex Next back. And I rewatched this and I noticed that I forgot to tell you in a pretty important detail, that should be in the final composition. And that is just to add a glow to that arc that's above the castle. I think all you need to add is like a basic stylized glow, maybe change the A and B colors, and then all you have to do is animate the intensity to go off towards the end. That's about it. But that's pretty easy to do. If you just look at that reference on Google, you should get it pretty spot on. It's just like one glow effect. I think I'm done with this tutorial. Render this out, make yourself whatever you want. Maybe if you want to change the text into something, I used this for my intro in this tutorial. But I'm really proud of this. It took a really long time to figure out how they kind of pieced it together. Maybe you could play around with some of the glows and stuff in this tutorial, but I encourage you to make it your own. And that's all I'm saying. But, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Leave a like if you liked the video. If you disliked it, leave a comment. Tell me what you didn't like, and I'll try and change that in a later tutorial. Leave a comment telling me what you might want to see in a later tutorial. And subscribe if you haven't. So, welcome all these new people. I think we just hit 10,000 views. So thank you so much for that. My name is Kex Next, and I will see you next time.